Thank you very much, Grant. And it occurs to me that your timing of this panel was very strategic because you wanted to catch everybody while they're still in the talent phase of their day before they become capital later on. This has been a terrific couple of days of learning a lot. Terrific speakers this morning as well. And it really highlights some of the challenge we're talking about here today. The growth around us is astronomical. I know yesterday, if you were at the keynotes, Dr. Madison talked about using 3D avatars and their role in healthcare. And I was sitting there thinking, what is the impact to the network of carrying a 3D avatar across in real time to help people with their healthcare? So anyway, let's just start with this whole topic of speed to market. I have two very distinguished gentlemen here that are leaders in the industry from the service provider side. They have strong backgrounds in all parts of this industry and are experts in this field. So let's just start with a definition. And so Tim, we'll start with you. And define speed to market in your own terms.
It's really giving customers what they want when they want it. All devices, no matter where they are in the world. I mean, that's customarily how we look at it. Anytime, anywhere, any device, any service. So there's a lot in that from a technology perspective, as all of us know, to actually make that happen. And I think we've kind of reached the point in the industry where it's actually possible to make that occur.
James.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, with Tim's comment there, I think I got to kind of elaborate on a little bit. I think you could actually break speed to market into two different views. The first view is being in a position to actually predict what the customers want. Yes. So then you are actually in the position to deliver it when they want it. And I think when you talk about speed to market, especially in the service provider space, that's usually the challenge that we face is what is the upfront development cycle before the customers are really demanding it, and then how long does it take to actually close the deal and activate that service once the customer has asked for it?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point on time to market. If you think back not too long ago, a couple of years, 18 to 24 months was the development cycle for most of us to get a brand new product out the door and stood up in a carrier grade type of a capability. Over the last couple of years, working very hard at it with many of you in the room, been able to get that down to 12 months on an average. The place where we're going, the expectation is 6 months or less. Which means that 70% has to be done within 90 days. Well, that speaks to a lot of changes in the way we've done business in the past. That speaks to the whole cycle of how do you test and certify and get things into the network differently than what you've done previously. The demand for those types of products is certainly there, and we've got to figure out a way to adapt to it. So it's a great point.
Thank you.
Yes, for sure. So I know that Tim and James, you're both very passionate about this topic, and there's a lot of talk about it throughout this conference as well, about the use or the role in software-defined networks and network functions virtualization in creating a more rapid deployment and development environment for the providers. I really like, there was a panel yesterday on SDN, and one of the people at the panel quoted a new saying, and he talked about it being a win-win between the service providers and the providers of technology, and he called it outcome as a service as his new term for it. But as we look at this, I know when I ran the networks for TELUS in Canada, one of the big challenges was always the transition. There's always that new technology that does make a big difference to your ability to service customers and capacity and speed to market. But can you at least comment on the transition to virtual deployment of SDN and NFV that you're looking at for your organizations?
Well, first of all, Dr. Savani scared the heck out of us about 4 years ago. He came and gave that speech in a lot more depth that you just heard. And one of the things that we asked him was this whole question on, where is the workforce of the future going to be? And, as we kind of went through that and we looked at the trends that were occurring in the industry, and you start to look at how are we going to, one, have the right technical expertise, but secondly, how are we going to meet the demands? And then you started looking at the mobility trends, which said, you see more and more mobile devices actually being the connection device of choice for customers. It just got to the point of saying we need a different way in which to approach this equation than the way we've done it over the last 20 to 25 years. And that led to software-defined networks and network function virtualization capabilities that would allow us to go much faster in meeting those demands and be able to spend the same amount of money. So, you know, it's tough to say you're spending $20 billion, $21 billion, and say that's not enough money. There isn't going to be, you know, a 25 or 30 or $40 billion investment to try to keep up with this growth. You better figure out how to do it differently. And that leads you to software and the evolution of being able to do more things in a software-defined type of capability in order to keep the cost points right, while at the same time you're able to really meet the demand requirements. So,
yeah, I think, again, I mean, Fraser, I know you probably want us to debate a little bit, but when we agree, it's hard to debate. I mean, so everything Tim said is absolutely correct, at least in my assessment. I think one of the things, Tim, I know you and I have talked about this on the side, is also the ability to fail fast. And when you have the ability to fail fast and the acceptance is there for failing fast, your speed to market actually will get better, because I think as an organization you want to take a little bit more of a risk in saying we may fail, we may have to reset. And reset in the past would mean another 18 to 24 month cycle. Reset in the future is really maybe even less than 6 months, given that, you know, that's where we're trying to target. So I think just the fact that it is software, your hardware spend should reduce. That in itself is actually a huge advantage.
yeah, I think it's a cultural change as well. I mean,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, we've been through, as an industry, many changes over the last 20, 25, 30 years. Each of those inflection points, you know, there's a cultural change that comes with it. It's probably now is greater than it's ever been, in that, you know, it's shifting so dramatically in the software direction. And this whole notion of failing fast in an environment of a carrier where you're trying to bring carrier grade at 5 nines reliability, that's a tough concept to, you know, be able to keep moving forward. So we have a lot we have to do as an industry to make sure that, in fact, we can maintain the quality, but in fact we get to this notion of failing fast and be able to step forward the introduction of new technologies.
You brought up two things, Tim, I'd like to build on, and you mentioned it really briefly, and I think it's very important. It was actually the subject of a breakfast meeting this morning here at TIA as well. And as I look at this, I spent my whole life as a network guy building and running large networks, and there's always been that kind of creative tension between network and data center. And yet it occurs to me that SDN and NFV make the network look much more like a data center. Data center people don't buy an individual box for every piece of software they run. Right? They have a more standardized platform and tend to centralize the software. And so you mentioned the word talent. From the talent point of view, have you guys looked at, do you have the right people? Or what are you doing to bring your people through to, you know, embracing a different way of building networks? And then the second side of that, Tim, is that quality expectation that we set through the network of 5 nines. How do you bring that into a data center type environment as well? So the talent and the quality.
From a talent perspective, you know, we're trying to go at this a lot of different ways. So you heard a little bit from Dr. Savani about some of the online stuff that we're doing. That's trying to re-educate, in many cases repurpose the talent that we have, so that in fact it can step into these more software-defined roles. In other cases, it's a complete change out of the talent, and you know, that's difficult in an environment where many other businesses are competing for the exact same talent. So it's a multiple pronged strategy, trying to ensure that in fact we do have the right talent in place. And then you have to chip away at the leadership as well, to make sure that your leadership is really prepared to make this transition with you. And so that's part of the education processes that we have underway. But you know, this is not an easy task for any of us. When many of us in the room, you look around here, you know, it's like, let me do a survey in here. How many of you have been in the industry for at least 20 years? So 80% of the room has been in the industry for 20 years. Okay, and you've reached a level of success based on that 20-year advancement, based on the way the industry grew up, which was proprietary hardware with software, and being able to do that better and better over various periods of time, and moving from analog to digital and so forth, and then now to mobility. We've been able to learn that process. As we make the jump to software, it's not an easy transition for many of the folks who've been in the industry for a long time. So you can't discount how difficult that is. And I'll pause here before I get to the quality question. Let James take a shot at this.
So no, I don't know that it's quite. To me, it's not the doom and gloom scenario that I think some people say, right? I mean, so the raise of hands was a little bit surprising to me, actually, Tim. So that was interesting. From the front here, there was a lot of hands up. So some people, were you doing it that way or this way? But yeah. But we talk about this as a pivot in the industry, and I think it's also a pivot in how you recruit your talent. And so it service providers and carriers and networks as a whole, you're not just going to wholesale replace your network. So the talent that we have today is still a talent that we need tomorrow and probably for the next several years to come. It's the intake and the new talent that we need. Our 1.5 or 1.9% of the replacement rate is what's concerning to me. But as you look at what universities are doing, you look at where people are focused their education, it is in software. You look at the network offering classes versus software classes. Software is dominating the universities today. And so for us, the way we're approaching that is a traditional network architect, maybe now a software architect coming into the company. Right. And we're hoping that as a transition occurs, it's really kind of a natural evolution with the network.
Then you asked a question on quality. How do you make sure? I mean, there's lots of things that we need to care for in this process. Inherently, software should be as good, or if not better, from an overall network reliability and performance perspective. At least, we've been able as an industry to really work software in that direction. The difference now, if you think about this, is IT has some flexibilities in that not everything is real time. And we've learned a lot of things in the IT world that we'll try to apply in the live public network. The bigger difference there is the fact this is real time. And so we have to care for this 5 nines reliability expectation that our customers have become accustomed to. And in doing that, these fail-fast strategies have to play in there. And it does speak to a lot more collaboration with our vendors than we've ever had before. The days of me sending the vendor off to go do their own thing, and then having you bring it to me and then sending you back, I can't afford that anymore. I need to collaborate with you up front and make sure that we're all working towards the same common end with an end objective from a timeline perspective in mind, to be able to accelerate those timelines. Quality has to then be built into that set of the processes. And we have a number of approaches that we're doing there, not only on the process side of it, but also in terms of the quality of the output and the metrics that we put in place. We've used TL 9000. We've used the Agile process and adopted that where we can. Certainly from a whole QMS perspective, the lean processes, we've used those. So there's Six Sigma as well. There's place in this evolution for those same quality processes to be able to really stand up and take us to the next level.
So James, from your opinion, what does the cost structure for virtualized networks look like? Is it software licensing? Are there huge savings? And where do you see where we previously may be spending on routers and firewalls and single-purpose boxes, will we now be spending it more on other types of service costs? So how do you see the cost breakdown going forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think there's still a lot to learn in that space. And as you talk through with the suppliers, how they're approaching their licensing models for the software that they're developing, Obviously, there's a reduction in manufacturing costs when you're not pumping out as much sheet metal,
Right.
but there's also probably a little bit of a shift to software costs in terms of onboarding to commodity hardware, whatever the hardware platform is. In the core space, at least in the near future, core routers still have to exist just from a pure traffic aggregation perspective. I think where you really see that cost benefit is really going to be back to what I call early revenue. So maybe, you know, increased revenue sooner, speed to market, good segue there, and the ability to focus on smaller devices that are a little bit more nimble. So instead of having purpose-built CPE, have CPE with different functions capable on them. And so from a hardware perspective, you should see a reduction there. But the software licensing is where I think the real question is. And then in terms of does a shift from CapEx to OpEx, is there a hit there? Because there's a lot of companies that look at it that way, and the financial teams will say, well, it's capital if it's spent this way, it's OpEx if it's spent that way, and some companies manage very differently. You know, CapEx is quote unquote easy, OpEx is very difficult, and then you flip that, and you've kind of created a new scenario and an operating model for the business.
What about timing? If I was to put you on the spot a bit, there's a lot of discussion about SDN and NFV and how great it's going to be, and it makes tons of sense, really, to architect a network that way. Realistically, when do you think you're going to see that in large-scale implementation in your organization?
That's all Tim points to me first. That's why there's AT&T people in the back going like this. No, just kidding. No, I think it's a reality. I believe it's a reality for the industry as a whole this year. You know, last year I said, I think we're years away from where it saves the world. I still believe that. But the reality is that you're seeing a lot of traction, particularly in the NFV space. I think SDN, we're still kind of trying to figure out exactly what that means to us. But in the NFV space, you're starting to see a lot of traction as a whole now. I think for our organization, we're trending right along with where the market space is. I've seen public announcements about what AT&T is doing, and I would say, I'm guessing you're going to say about the same thing.
Yeah, for us, exactly, James. For us, we drew a circle around these architectures and technologies and said we're going to be there in 5 years. I mean, that's the only thing that's different about what AT&T is doing versus what others in the world may be doing right now. We've said 5 years from now, we expect that we're going to stand up not only SDN approaches, but also, the NFV and have a very open network environment. So with that, it puts in motion a number of things that may have been a little further out. So we don't see this as a 10-year progression. We really do see it as a 5-year transition to where 80% of our spend is on these types of technologies. Okay. Now, when we went to Domain 1.0, it took us a couple of years before we got 80% of the spend going towards Domain 1.0 architectures. We expect that it'll take us a little less time to get there with Domain 2.0 approaches and user-defined network cloud. We'll start standing up some of the pieces of that this year, and same types of environments.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important, because when you look at the carriers, particular carriers of size, making statements and saying this, we're starting now, we're starting this year. And Tim's point, they publicly said within 5 years we're going to have this type of infrastructure. It actually, I think, helps leapfrog where the industry could have been or would have been. And so I think it takes that level of collaboration industry-wide to say, okay, we're done talking about it, let's start executing.
Right. I'm going to switch perspective now to our customers, users of technology. I heard a great quote in a talk about the Internet of Things here this week in TIA. And we love these terms. We love SDN, NFV, IoT. We're addicted to three-letter acronyms in this industry. But what does it mean to a user? What does it mean to someone who chooses and pays for our services? And I like that one quote about IoT is that people don't know what it means, but they will expect what it provides. As we get more and more addicted to technology, I mean, Tim, you said before the network has become like oxygen. If anybody here have teenagers? What happens when you take their smartphone away for 15 minutes? I mean, in about 30 seconds, their lips turn blue, right? And they lose consciousness in 3 minutes. And just think about the way it's going in the industry and how important this is to them. So looking at it from the user perspective, they don't care about NFV and all these things, these terms we use. But also AT&T's coined a new phrase called a user-defined network. So can you comment on what does this mean to somebody who uses our services as we go forward?
Well, probably in 4 words, maybe 5. Global, virtual, ultra-fast, and has to have effortless capability associated with it. Those would be some of the things that the customer's expectation is. And when you boil that down to what does that mean, I'll just use, from an operator perspective, I'll just use American Idol as an example. And we built an overlay network for American Idol voting. Okay, it sits idle for 9 months out of the year, no pun intended. Okay, can't repurpose that network because it was built specifically, for that particular customer. Where we're headed, and headed there very rapidly, is the ability to repurpose the network based on what the customer demand might be, and thus the name User-Defined Network Cloud. So that we as operators have the ability to shift that demand or shift the capacity where it is needed, and the customer has the ability to define what it looks like, either speed or the amount of time, et cetera, et cetera. And that's from the not only business user but also all the way through to the consumer. That same expectation, I think, will become more and more what they are looking for from us as an industry, is the ability for them to tell us exactly how they want to use the network.
James?
Yeah, I'm just sitting here kind of thinking about what that means, Internet of Things. And I don't know what I'm about to share with you truly means in terms of impact to the world, but it's something to think about. So when I had the opportunity to purchase a new bed recently, this is no endorsement, I went to Sleep Number. Sleep Number now has connected beds. They just launched them, where they monitor your sleep patterns. You can control the bed and look at all the bed statistics from your tablet or phone, and it's all this data stored in the cloud. And I sat there for a minute, and I thought, as a technologist, I thought, I absolutely want that. And then within a few minutes, I thought, why do I want that? And I think, and I believe that is what the Internet of Things currently is, right? It's a connected everything. Well, there are some things, when you look at them, there actually are great use cases for what that connectivity is. In the case of the bed, I think there actually are great things. You get sleep studies done at home now instead of having to go to the facilities or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's applying what the reality is and what the benefit is to that device. Because my neighbor, he's got Twitter on his refrigerator. All it results in is us messing with his Twitter account while we're all over having a party. I mean, but it will eventually mean something to us that is real. And the proliferation of devices to the network is going to be, could be very devastating if we don't plan that out.
Right. So James, talking about your role as a service provider and looking at these new architectures and what they bring, how does it change your role? Like, I like to think of it as, in the past when we define service providers, we were using a fairly deterministic, standardized environment, frankly, to provide the technology and services we provide. So do you become app developers? Do you become system integrators, or a combination, or all of the above? Like, how does it change CenturyLink's role as we go into the more virtualized environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of changing the role, I think it makes what's traditionally been viewed as, and service providers as a whole have been kind of battling this. What are you going to do about over the top? What are you going to do about that? Because you're a commodity pipe provider. I actually think this advancement in technology is re-energizing for all of us as carriers, because it actually puts us right in the driver's seat of taking care of the customer demands, taking care of the customer needs. And whether that's becoming an integrator of our partners' apps onto common devices, or whether that's an integrator of the experience at home for Internet of Things, or in some cases developing control systems for those Internets of Things. I think it's nothing but actually open opportunity for us.
But given the speed to market pressures, do you find yourself sometimes when the new technologies come out and the standards are still in the formative stages and haven't maybe been totally hardened over a number of years, do you find yourself standing between, say, two suppliers who both think they adhere to the standard but it doesn't work, and then you're kind of...
Yeah, but that's nothing new. I mean, the best thing about standards is you can pick which one you want to follow in our industry traditionally. I think where the gain actually is in that ability to fail fast. The other thing is that I actually believe, and I might be a little naive here, but I believe there's actually more collaboration cross-company and cross technology expertise right now than there ever has been.
Very good.
So you have software manufacturers working with the hardware manufacturers that used to be fierce competitors and vice versa in a way that I've never seen before.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely true and happening more and more. I mean, we've seen some interesting combinations come together probably within the last 18 months. I think, the open source environment also, starts to define more quickly what some of the standards might be. So I think, that's contributing to this as well, whereas standard bodies may take, years in some cases in the past to bring some of the technologies to bear. I think some of the open source, open code environments will define them more quickly for the industry because of this phenomena, one, working together, but also, being able to use APIs and other things, which ultimately will define, how the customers will use those products. So I think we're less fearful of that than we might have been a couple of years ago, and we're seeing a lot of traction across the industry by really approaching this from an open perspective. And for us, and I'm sure James as well, I mean, we're doing more as an open network now than we've ever done in our past. And APIs have become really the way that we're moving more quickly to marketplace as well.
Yeah, I'd kind of elaborate on that because I said the partners and suppliers are working together. I think the other thing that we've learned as an industry is as large consumers of network equipment, we tend to drive our vendors to certain ways of implementing things. And I think as a whole, as an industry, we've all also decided that this is the standards-based approach to go. And so while a CenturyLink or an AT&T may have had a very different view of how to solve the same type of Ethernet delivery, for example, right, I'm starting to see companies across the board coming together and saying this makes the most sense for the customer and for us.
But to both of your point, you're opening up APIs right into the heart of your network. And you're bringing a whole different abstraction of development that you don't necessarily control. How do you feel about that? Like there's that whole, like Tim, you've mentioned companies you're working with that people haven't heard of, and opening up app development to come right into the core of your network to increase that speed to market. Like what sort of challenges do you see around that? I know the benefits are rapid iteration, but what sort of challenges?
It's cultural. And if you think about it, these have been closed environments for years. Vendor community, it's been a closed environment. Now you're, through the APIs, opening up a lot of other ideas about how particular products can be delivered. But, once you get past that, which we have, and you start to look at, many other, not only companies, but developers who can approach the problem from a different perspective, you start to see the real potential. I mean, just the hackathons in general. I mean, last year, I think we did somewhere between 15 or so 20 hackathons. Every time you go to one of those hackathons, you give them a couple of APIs to develop to, and you look at 120 teams go at it, and you see what they develop in 24 hours, you step back and say, this is the way of the world. I mean, we're just going to see more and more where, in fact, you can bring development community to help you kind of bring to bear what customers would value. So it's, for us, it's a conscious choice to actually go down this path.
In a way, and I'm not too proud to say this, I think it's also learning from what we saw happen with the smartphone space, right? Exactly. If you look at how people interact with their smartphones today, making and receiving phone calls is probably on the lower end of how the device is actually used, and that's only because of the concept of app development coming to that device.
Certainly driven a different problem to the operator side of the equation, in that all the buildings, now you have to cover with a wireless signal, yep, whereas before that wasn't the case. So it has spawned technologies that are all offload strategies, Wi-Fi, DAS, small cells, femto, as a way of trying to deal with that phenomena. But it is true. I mean, I'm sure everybody in this room is probably guilty of sitting in their office with their IP phone on the desk, but being on the wireless device having the conversation. That's just the way it's going to be going forward.
You guys make a really good point, and the fact that opening up the app development in a somewhat controlled environment is what's made smartphones go crazy. And to your point, Tim, people spend more time in the apps on their smartphone probably than in its original core function of telephony. So that's a really good point. So I want to ask one more quick question before we go to the audience for some questions. I know we're short on time, but I think we all agree where we want to go. We all agree, and that's my Quest Forum plug here, that quality has to be integrated throughout the process. We don't want to jump off the diving board and invite the water on the way down for quality, or we'll learn some hard lessons again. And so I think we all kind of agree around that. And so we all know where we want to go. We also know where we are. Can you just comment, I'll start with James, on what's it going to take to get there? You have this huge installed base, and you have massive networks you're running today, and you know where you want to be. What's it going to take to get there?
Well, I mean, I think we sort of touched on that earlier. We start now. We absolutely start now. It's tough because there's not an influx of capital dollars to make this investment. And we do have daily business and customers that have expectations of stability today. And so our approach has been focus new products, new development, kind of create that ecosystem moving forward in this space, and then really letting it, kind of success-based growth help us out there. I think the other opportunity is as you life cycle the network out, that's usually a hard and fast timeline. Obviously different space, different devices, there's different times associated with it, but you can actually start the plan now saying, I know in 4 years, this portion of my network I'm going to have to refresh.
Right.
And that actually allows you to build out a much longer term roadmap of how you get this end-to-end view in terms of enablement. And the other thing is I think it's very important to, we talked about collaborating with our partners and providers up front, collaborating with the customers up front. Some of the best ideas that we've had in terms of how we would leverage, speed to market, SDN, NFE concepts has actually come directly from my large customers. When I start talking to them, what is it that you need from us? And the ideas that they had were close to what we thought, but not necessarily exactly it.
Just give me an idea of a couple things this will do for a large customer.
So I think one of the most interesting things to me is we keep talking about NFE and SDN, particularly SDN, as allow the customer to control the network, create services on demand or bandwidth on demand. I think this goes back to my approach and some of the customers' concepts is they actually don't want that. They actually want the network to react before they have to do anything to the network. It goes back to the concept of the self-healing network. In this case, it's not necessarily self-healing, it's self-enabling. And I think that is where the tie between virtualized services in terms of NFE and SDN actually truly come together. Because the more you can take the human element out of asking the network to do something, the more instantaneous the service actually will be.
I think that's right on. In terms of how do you evolve these networks, this whole notion of a quality experience at the customer's level has got to be baked into the equation. So, we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make these transitions. We've done it for years as an industry. As we've gone from these inflection points on different technologies of how do you make that seamless from a customer's experience perspective. It'll be the same thing here. And, the mechanisms that have allowed us to move forward, they may are very similar in that, you still are going to build metrics that give you eyes into how well you're performing as you go to these various phases. Now, I think the metrics have to make the transition with you. Can't use the same metrics we've used in the past necessarily for these networks we're building in the future. So we need to evolve the thinking around, what metrics are actually the most important, and then get those baked in so that, in fact, as an industry, we're using those. It's one of the reasons that AT&T is very supportive of the Quest Forum, because it gives you a way to talk anywhere in the world using metrics as the common language, and we have no communications problem on performance then, because they're both sides of the table are looking at the metric the exact same way, no language barrier. So it'll be the same case here because, you know, the suppliers here, I'll just give you an example of the first set of suppliers that we announced for our Domain 2.0, our user-defined network cloud. Ericsson, Swedish, TLF, small software company in Sweden, Affirmed, Boston-based, and Metaswitch, you know, London-based. Okay. If you kind of look at, you know, where's the language barrier, there's potential there. There's others that go the next series of those announcements, Juniper and Amdocs. You know, we can build a common base between all those entities on how we talk about performance. So that has to be a part of this equation as we move forward, and we're moving down that path.
So in summary, it looks like we have a huge challenge in front of us, that 13-fold increase in traffic in the next 5 years. It's probably a conservative estimate from all accounts, but this may well be a part of increasing our speed to market and making us more flexible with this new architecture. I'd like to open it up to the floor for any questions of these two gentlemen. There's one in the back, please.
Do you guys foresee any changes in the consumer side where the actual hardware will be split up from the software? So these become essentially dummy access devices and we just access all software in the cloud. And how does that affect you know, revenue streams and cost structures?
Oh, that's a great question.
So that is the path that we're on, separation of hardware and software, and the control plane, you know, associated with that. It's not that you eliminate hardware, you just change the nature of the hardware to common off-the-shelf servers. And the timing on that will be, I think, beginning late this year into next year. I think it accelerates in 15 and 16. By the time you get to 17, this is probably the way in which most of the purchases are being made. Now, yeah, from a cost perspective, our guidance here to the street has been, you know, a slight downward shift in the capital is what we see. So we're, you know, and one way to think about that is that I'm putting a lot of money into hardware today. You know, I'll continue to buy, but I'm going to buy this in a different configuration where software is more of the mix. And to that end, more and more of the existing suppliers are beginning to lay out their roadmaps for how they move from hardware to software. So I think from a timing perspective, it's probably in the 15, 16 timeframe, you'll start to see some of this already stand up. We already have a model in IT. IT's been down this road for the last couple of years. So the model already exists for how you might move here. The complication is the real-time aspect of what you have to do on the public network.
And you held a device up, and I couldn't tell from the lights and everything if that was a tablet or a laptop, but I assume it was one of those types of devices. I think absolutely we will move that direction as an industry. I mean, Tim just stated that. I think there's still a lot of challenges to solve with the expectation of what that device can do. When you're in fixed state or you're in well-covered areas, not a problem. Everything essentially becomes a video stream at that point when you think about presentation layer. I think where you will find adoption of a disconnected device or, you know, a cloud-based software with a local hardware is for folks who are going to be on airplanes where their connectivity may be spotty, so they actually can't get to the device per se. And I think that's a place where we have to start focusing is we understand how to solve metros, we understand how to solve land-based connectivity with small cells and femtos and everything else that Tim mentioned earlier, but it's now what I call the outskirts or extreme measures where it's when you're in transit, when you're on trains, you're in planes, and even cars, how do you have constant connectivity back to the cloud-based operating system?
I think the other aspect of this is this is probably true in the U.S. faster than it is in other parts of the world, although Asia is moving very quickly there. For those of you who've traveled in Europe, you know it's very difficult to get through the European experience and have your data work really well all the way through that. So there's big challenges there in terms of where in the world you're able to utilize this. The expectation, though, is that no matter where you go, ultimately there's enough agreements, much like we did with voice, where your data operates the same way, where you can pull the experience across with you. But that's still a lot of work that carriers have to do with others around the world to get that in place.
Yep.
So the timing on here is certainly a progression, and that's why it's, it's probably more in the 16, 17 timeframe, particularly for the device type aspect of it. I see that as the latter part of this evolution, but eventually there.
There's one in the middle. There's one on the wing.
We have one over here first and then one in the back.
Okay.
Hi there. Could you give some examples of the best use cases for the dynamic network that SDN can enable? So what kind of end applications will we see with a dynamic network? And what are your customers saying about that?
Connected car, that's probably the first one you're going to see. You're starting to, the one example I gave you on American Idol, the ability to stand up and dynamically, start to see the reallocation of those networks is probably the next application, if you will, where the user has the ability to define their network in their period of time. Lots of systems work to do that because the experience needs to be real-time and effortless for you to redesign and utilize that application. So those are some of the first ones that we see.
Yeah, I think there's also, it depends on the segment. So for example, connected car I think is going to be a huge opportunity and also a huge infrastructure burden. You think about all these cars that are coming out. I think if you were to switch the focus a little bit and look at business, a few of the examples that I know are being looked at kind of publicly is on-demand security capabilities. So as the industry sees security attacks ramping up, whether it's sheer bandwidth or very intelligent focused attacks, being able to dynamically adjust to that versus having to go out and deploy scrubbers manually, which is where we are today, is actually a huge advantage both for national infrastructure and for the customer. Another opportunity would be going back to the concept of reuse of the network. It allows carriers to actually be a lot smarter with how they make that investment and how the customers can consume that infrastructure. It goes back to the view of when you have a converged network and you have a lot of traffic during the daytime for businesses, but at night it's the consumer traffic using all those bits. It's really no different for businesses that operate globally around the world and follow the sun mentality of how you allocate your network resource.
Mm-hmm. There was one question at the back, Tyler. Do you have time?
One more.
Okay.
Could you talk about how your vendors have reacted to what you've done here? Has there been attempts by some to protect what they have, reluctance to move? And as you move towards new vendors and maybe some of those don't participate, how do you support all the legacy systems that you have deployed with those vendors? How are you balancing that?
So I believe the question was, how are we seeing the vendors and suppliers respond to this kind of transformation in the industry? That's the first question? Okay. Believe it or not, I actually think it's a myth that the vendors are not interested in this, from what I can tell. Where we sit, the vendors absolutely are interested in this because remember, they also have compression problems. They have manufacturing problems and challenges, I should say, is probably the better word. And just like us, we know what our customers are demanding, and so they have to adjust to support that. One of the things I think the vendors see this as an advantage in is it actually gives them a better focus on their business. Instead of having to have hardware and software, which they've been doing forever, they can now actually focus a lot more on the software aspect, which has been the primary issue in the space for a long time. The second part of the question, then I'll stop. I'm not seeing a lot of vendors saying they're not on board. I actually can't think of one. I actually have the opposite problem where I have vendors that I don't think are qualified to be in this space are telling me they have awesome solutions. And so now you have to start weeding through the potentials there. So.
Yeah, exactly right. We have the same view that haven't seen a vendor yet that hasn't said they have a roadmap for how they're going to get here. We have a immediate test for that, which is in our foundries. If you say you can virtualize your environment, we ask you to stand it up and show it to us. So it immediately eliminates the slideware from reality. But surprisingly, there are a lot of the vendors who have virtualized and have really solid solutions on common off-the-shelf servers. So it's great to see. And it does present this issue of now you got to go through a whole selection criteria, which is a little different. It does open up the opportunity for smaller firms, particularly software-oriented firms, to be able to come in and establish a direct relationship with the carriers. So we see that as a new area potentially for the vendors. As well, a lot of the alliances, whereas the larger players in the past may not have been open to some of the smaller software firms working with them, we're seeing a lot more of the working together aspect starting to show up. So I think the next few years is going to be very interesting from that regard. From an investment perspective, as I said, we don't see a dramatic drop in the amount of investment. We just see the shift occurring for where those dollars are going to go. And there's opportunity for margin of all of those existing OEMs to be able to shift or maintain their margins, even though they're shifting kind of where their demand and where their manufacturing might be. So this will play out. A lot more to go here. It's early in the game, but at least those are some of the early indicators that we're seeing.
Yeah, and just to add, because you made me think of something. I said I'd be done, but I lied. I think the one perfect example, and we're both customers of this company publicly. So, in our video space, there's a company called Azuki that we've worked with quite extensively in our video offerings. And those know AT&T and CenturyLink actually have common video infrastructure from a software standpoint. And Ericsson acquired that company mostly, and it was all an admission. And they said, we know this is the place we need to be, this is the expertise we need. And so they went out and partnered up and eventually acquired that company. I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that type of activity because these small startups are bringing some phenomenally cool things to market.
We have the same view.
Well, I see out there that you're all eager to transform yourselves into capital this afternoon and to get some lunch. So first thing I want to do is thank TIA for this opportunity to present with you here today and to have this panel. I also want to thank my two panelists. These are absolute leaders in the industry. It's clear that you're taking us where we need to be to support this massive customer demand we're all looking down the barrel at. And do it in a way that we don't relearn the high quality lessons we've learned as service providers in the past. And it's great to see as many of your suppliers here asking you the questions of what they need, what you need from them. So I'd just like to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Fraser.